The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents, I Can Do All Things Except... Hey everybody, how you doing? I had a friend post a Bible verse. Believe it or not, I have plenty of friends from my Christian days. They haven't all cut me off. Someday it'll probably happen, who knows? But there's people I genuinely like, and often they will share stuff. I have some family and friends who fairly consistently post Bible verses. I don't go after them. I leave their Facebook pages alone. But one of them posted a Bible verse the other day, and it reminded me of a particular problem that I wanted to make sure that we addressed thoroughly here. Some of you may know about a website that I used to run, and yes, we'll be getting to that in just a minute. But in this verse, Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. I remember hearing this verse growing up. I was Southern Baptist primarily, and you would get these things. They're sort of like the verses that become the inspirational bumper stickers or the things that you hang on your wall that have kind of been, it's live, laugh, love now, or chicken soup for the soul, or, all these little things you'd hang on the wall. Or when I grew up, it was the footprints poster and things like, I can do all things through Christ that strengthened me. And it's a statement that some people take very seriously. And in some respects, considering the doctrine of Christianity, they should take it pretty seriously, because what you have here is a God who is supposedly the creator and sustainer of the universe, a God who, for whom nothing that is possible is impossible, a God that can do anything that can be done. And so if God can also violate the physical rules that he created, supposedly, then what is there that God can't do? And what is there that God can't make or allow or assist you in doing? I may get to, well, can you flap your wings and fly with Christ's help? And there are people who would probably say, yes, I can, but that's not part of God's plan. Because in all of these things, it's really not so much, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. It is, I can do all the things that God wants me to be able to do. And that's the sort of caveat. But that raises other problems as well on the issue of what will God allow, what's part of God's plan, etc. I used to have a website called ironchariots.org. There's an archive of it somewhere. It no longer exists. Basically, it was a Wikipedia style catalog of apologetic arguments and responses. It was a project that I started 20 years ago or more, actually more than that, and it lived for a while. There were a lot of people who contributed to it, but I was basically going through and doing a lot of the initial work, and then some other people came in and took it over, and I was happy to no longer participate there. But you might be familiar with this passage from Judges, Judges 1, verse 19, but I'm going to read 17, 18, and 19 because it's important to this story. Starting with verse 17, it says, And Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they slew the Canaanites that inhabited Zephath, and utterly destroyed it, and the name of the city was called Hormah. Also, Judah took Gaza with the coast thereof, and Askelon with the coast thereof, and Ekron with the coast thereof. So 17 and 18 are listing Judah's conquering. Verse 19 says, And the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountain, but he could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. This is really interesting because this is a verse that says, if you imagine you were Judah and you went out and you killed a bunch of people and took their stuff, and you went out and killed a bunch more people and took their stuff, and then you went to go kill some other people and take their stuff, and God was with you, and you failed because they had chariots of iron. Now, if you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, but Judah was unable to defeat an army because they had chariots of iron, then that seems to draw a distinction between Christ and the Lord. which might explain why there are Jews who don't accept Jesus as the Messiah. I doubt they use this particular verse, but it could be. There's a long line of things that people attributed as expectations for the Jewish Messiah that Jesus didn't actually fulfill, which is why there are Jews who converted and Jews who don't. But maybe Christ isn't the Lord in question. Maybe, was their God all-powerful? Was their God even the only God? We know that the ancient Jewish model was closer to henotheistic or polytheistic in some respects because there were other gods that were just weaker or less than. Pharaoh had his god, and his magicians could do stuff through the power of, whichever god they were advocating for. And the Bible continues to refer to, you'll have no other gods before me, which is a really silly thing to do if you're the only God. It's like, I'm the only God, but you won't have any other gods before me, which is really just saying the same thing as don't worship false gods if you're the only God. But those other false gods could do all kinds of things. And so maybe that verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, is a bit of exaggeration. And clearly, it probably doesn't mean that you could flap your wings and fly with Christ's help. And as I mentioned before, there are people who would say, oh, yes, I can. It's just that God doesn't want to actually do it. But the verses continue with this notion that everything that happens is all part of God's plan. Everything that happens is all part of God's plan. And so the temptation is to look at the passage in Judah and in Judges and say, wait a minute, it was God's plan for Judah to kill the Canaanites and take Gaza and Ascalon and Ekron, but it wasn't God's plan to take out the inhabitants of the valley, because it clearly didn't happen, except that Judges verse 19 specifically says, and the Lord was with Judah. It doesn't say that in verses 17 and 18. It's implied. But in verse 19, it specifically adds this, the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountains. See how powerful our God is, but he couldn't do anything about the valley because they had chariots of iron. What do you expect God to do? I mean, can't do everything, except that he supposedly can. So if everything happens according to God's plan, then it was God's plan to lead Judah into defeat. And it was God's plan to list the cause of that defeat as the military advantage of chariots of iron. And it was God's plan to let someone else claim that they can do all things through him. And it was God's plan for people to find these passages and find the contradictions in them, and also to find the clear fact that even with God's help, Judah was no match for advanced military technology. Military technology that we would scoff at today. So can the Lord who was with Judah beat any army today? If Judah put together his army right now, if chariots of iron can defeat it, I mean, tanks are, I guess, chariots of iron, but we're talking an order of magnitude or more beyond the chariots of iron that would have been up against Judah. Can God's supported army defeat machine guns and missiles? Maybe if Christ isn't the Lord, and you say you can do all things through Christ, then maybe Christ is more powerful than the Lord. Maybe Christ isn't the same Lord that led Judah into a defeat. Can the Lord regrow a limb? What about Christ? Are they the same? Can either of them do it? Can it be demonstrated? Can either of them, or the one of them, beat chariots of iron? Can they regrow a limb? Can they heal or cure anything? Could they give me a hangnail? And how do you know? And how can you prove it? If you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you, why can't you provide sufficient evidence for that claim? Why can't you provide sufficient evidence for the claim that Christ exists now or existed previously? Why can't you present sufficient evidence to say that God is real, that miracles happen, that God changes lives, and not merely belief in God inspires people to attribute the change in their life to a God, whether it exists or not. It seems that skeptics who rely on testable claims and who seek strong supporting evidence have the intellectual equivalent of chariots of iron. Or maybe the story's just not true. Either way, I don't think you can actually do all things either through the Lord or through Christ, and the rest of us are waiting for you to demonstrate that it's actually the case instead of just tossing around platitudes that make you feel good, like you've got a big, strong person backing you up when they're doing nothing that we can tell at all. See you next time.